Okay, we're all set, Mary Kay.
Well, do you want to take us back to Tampa, or would you like me to, Leslie, where it was really warm?
I would like to go back to Tampa. I would like to go back to Florida, actually. It's cold up in Minnesota.
Well, a group of us met, last Monday in Tampa, where we began to explore what the leadership is, and I'm kind of that person talking with my hands as usual, but what you can't see are an amazing group of very inspired and inspiring network leaders that were doing part of their inquiry around building networks that are sustainable, innovative, creative, and providing amazing services and care in the very unique communities. And this particular call right now with the 24 of you on it, ranging from my home state of Pennsylvania, although I'm now here on Bainbridge Island in Washington, to Washington and all places in between, is just a wonderful indicator of the unique nature of the networks that are serving equally unique communities. So I have a background in healthcare, having the privilege to serve as a hospital administrator of both rural and urban hospitals for 20-some years, and then working actually in a healthcare network and pulling together and having the honor of working with people really committed to delivering a different sort of service that would conserve resources and allow resources to be diverted into things that are critical for care in hard-to-serve communities. So healthcare is my passion. I've gone upstream a little bit in that I'm now working in an MBA program and serve as the Dean of Academic Affairs for an MBA program here in Washington, where students are really focused on entrepreneurial efforts. And part of what I teach is leadership and personal development. I have a special bias for people willing to work in networks, which we'll see in a moment are very unique creatures. And we'll talk about why that is and why in this economy that sharing and creating shared resources is so essential for creating a world that works within the United States and within our unique states. So Leslie, if I could get you to pull up our slides, we'll begin to do our work today. So as we move to our overview of what we're going to accomplish today, I have an invitation for you. And while I realize this call is being recorded, so please only share that information that you're comfortable sharing. But it really, in a learning community, is so effective when we're able to get voices either in the chat box. So those of you who are just really aces on your technology can use the chat box, or if you want to hit *2, can give us examples verbally that makes our conversation and this learning community really vibrant. And the last group was willing to experiment and innovate a little bit there, so I offer that invitation to you. The only things that you need for today's session is your undivided attention. If you would turn the technology so it's facing down and allow yourself the next 42 minutes to really engage in curiosity and learning. That's an invitation and a gift. If you'll pull the self-assessment, as Leslie said, close to you so that we can refer to the first two sections, that would be great. And the third thing I'd invite you to do before we get started and get too deep into this is just to stand. For some of you, you're cruising in on the end of a long day, so could you just stand with me for a moment? And I'm just going to envision people from North Carolina, Pennsylvania, my colleagues in Washington standing, and just kind of reach up as far as you can with both arms. Just stretch, stretch. And envision that you have, again, this next 40-some minutes just to be with colleagues doing similar amazing work in the world, and you have a chance to learn from each other. Okay, down we go. So the agenda for today is of course next on here, and I'm just going to allow you to read it, but what we're going to focus on are really three areas. why do networks need innovation and creativity in order to not only thrive but to build sustainability plans? Um, how does one leverage the tools of creativity and innovation? And we're going to review 3 to 4 tools today. And 3, what will allow you to experiment and experience innovation and creativity? And so before we end our conversation today, there'll be an opportunity for you to actually identify an area that you would like to experiment with a little creativity in, and that's totally directed by you. It's not part of anything you need to turn in. We just really want this learning community dedicated to a chance to add this element of business to your portfolio. So that's what we're going to accomplish during our time together. Here is the first tool, and we're just going to kind of plunge right into it. Before I do, let's experiment with the chat box so that everybody gets familiar with it, or doing the mute on your phone, and that's *2. How many of you have agreements that you use in every board meeting or every advisory meeting that kind of talk about how you'll engage with one another? Again, you can do the chat box, and how many of you have these agreements? They're community agreements. They're rules of the road. People call them many things, but what they are is a container. Great, I'm seeing a good mix of those who don't have them, some who do have them, some who, great. Deborah, this is wonderful news. So you've got them for part of the Health Services Hub, and now you're beginning to see what works on other facets of your network. Good. Rules from our consulting group. Michelle, as we dive into this innovation and creativity, that's a perfect platform, actually, for doing some experimentation around creativity and innovation. And Sherry, not so much. Perfect. That's exactly the continuum that I often see when I'm working with groups who are just newly coming together or have been together for a while and are maybe moving into the realm of assuming you know how everyone works together. And as we all know, assuming is a little bit dangerous to do. So I give you this as a sample for our learning community today. And thank you all for jumping in the chat box. That looks like it's going to work, so feel free to continue to put notes or questions in there as we go through and share with one another. Here are some suggestions for our time together, not only today, but as we move through our time together over the next 3 questions. A willingness to arrive on time, and Leslie and I commit to you that we'll end on time and respect your time, that you engage in deep listening, and that's why we encourage you to flip that technology over and just give yourself this time together. Posing questions, please feel free to do that or share as you're just doing now ideas or suggestions, because posing questions is a way that opens up everyone's space for innovation and creativity. And pose promising practices. We're also going to talk today about the flip side of promising practices. Feel free, as you feel comfortable, to share profitable failures. And there's many things that you can tag along with a pilot that goes south or doesn't work as you expected. But unless it's tied to patient care, where we know we need to be exceedingly thoughtful, but most business pilots can really use the experimentation tied to creativity and innovation. And then agree, one last opportunity here is to take on one learning goal or one learning commitment between now and the next time we meet. I'm intrigued, and you can see as we flip back to the chat box in the community agreements, there is also different ways to formulate these agreements. I'm intrigued with Denise's agreement about a communication tree, and that's another wonderful innovation on community agreements. How will we communicate and keep each other up to date on what's happening, because things move so quickly in our systems in the community and systems that impact our community. So great. Let me just pause here and say, can everyone live with this agreement for how we'll talk and inquire together today? Anything we're missing here? Okay, Kay, I'm going to take your word at it, and we're going to be good to go. I, again, encourage you, this is the first tool for innovation and creativity. The reason for that, and I probably don't need to share that with this group, there's such a great proportion of you who use a tool or something like this. This creates the container for meeting the goals that you have established for your grant, and we'll look at those goals in section B2 on your assessment. But it also opens up, this agreement opens up space when we pose questions, opens up space for innovation and creativity, which ties, as we'll hear, directly to sustainability. Great. Thank you, Annette. I'll take that vote. So here we go. We just wanted to quickly give you each an appreciation for the work that you're doing leading these networks. Whether you're the designated leader or you have been pulled in as a guiding force to the network, pulling together the work of a network is often feeling as though you're, to steal a phrase from sports, punching above your weight. And so we want to recognize that this work is complex, and yet at the same time, it really can be tied to an assessment and also tied as well to sustainability and innovation. So let's go to the assessment tool itself, if everybody has that handy, please. And although it seems a little strange, I'd like for you to take a moment, either if you're writing it or if you're crafting it on your computer, to actually fill out section A. There's something very powerful about doing an assessment and starting with the name of your network. In the naming, it really helps to remind you as you write it often that a group of people came together with probably very diverse ideas, maybe still holding those diverse ideas, but really committed to saying, how is it that on some items we can join the sharing economy and we can begin to work together in a way that we haven't yet experimented with or experienced. So fill out section A. It'll just take you probably just a second. And then we're going to move to B1. So I'll just pause there for a second, and then we'll move to B1. So B1, you're going to hold this question as your own question, and this begins to be our second tool. So in the first tool, we looked at agreements and how those are a container not only for meeting goals that you've set, but opening the door for some innovation and creativity. When we get to this section, just take a second, and if you're new to a network or relatively new or you're seasoned as a network leader, just think about the HRSA funding for this particular grant that you have, and how would you rank your knowledge of what they were envisioning as possible based on the long history that they've had in creating these sort of affiliations and networks. It ranges from fully to barely, and it's you kind of giving yourself a score on that. And to the right of that, just kind of jot down the date. I know you put the date down in the assessment. Well, we're going to come back and revisit this B1 as we move through the learning community. Okay. Here we go, back to the slides again. Thank you. So why is it important to rank that? And let's kind of look at, I borrowed this from Rebecca Davis, who's actually, I saw you, Rebecca, on our line of folks participating. Thank you. I borrowed this from the NCHN Association, and this is the definition of what's a rural health network. So back in the 80s, and some of the networks that we have are really date back to the 80s and perhaps a little bit before. In the 80s, a group of intrepid pioneers came together and began to discuss what was happening in this sharing economy. And they realized that this is really, if you look at it from a business model, from a business perspective, that this was really a unique framework, that each network in each state or location within a state was unique, it was visionary, usually was forging relationships among largely competitive institutions and providers. Now, isn't that remarkable? And the outcome of competitors sitting together was to, on some level and in some areas, work together to achieve quality, affordable, and sustainable health care. So I know your networks have many, many diverse and unique partners. Some of them are hospitals, either critical access hospitals, state hospital associations, tertiary centers, educational facilities, developmental facilities. It is just this wonderful array of partners. And again, many of the partners are competitors, and yet there's some strategic vision that allow them to sit at a table with you and say, where are those areas that we can collaborate on and still at the same time remain competitive? That is a healthy business model from someone who teaches at an MBA school, and it is a very complex model. So just kudos to all of you for engaging in this kind of work. And again, this may not relate totally to each network, but you can begin to see from the 27 participants that are on this call, we probably have 27 different and unique networks. And if we had time, we'd kind of map who our stakeholders are, and we'll do that actually in our second call when we talk about change. But today, just recognize and realize who and what you're dealing and engaging with. So here is yet another tool that you can use, and this is using technology to pull in some of these diverse opinions and opportunities that exist out there. Before we do that, I'd like you to go back to your assessment tool again. And you can see we're going to play in these calls, and that's exactly what I'm going to call it. You're going to play in these calls with going back and forth between the topic, which in this case is innovation and creativity, and your assessment tool. So we'll support you as you move through this assessment. And this tool itself is a tool for innovation and creativity. So if you go to B2, this allows you, and in this case, we'll only take the time to fill out one goal. And you probably, all of you, can just off the top of your mind put down one of the goals that you have established for your network. And if you'll just jot that in there. And for some of you who are willing, if you wouldn't mind jotting just one of the goals in the chat box, that begins to give us a flavor of the uniqueness of each community that is represented on this particular inquiry call. So on your self-assessment, and I'm kind of asking you to multitask here, note a goal and note it in the chat box. Great, I'm seeing a couple of you do that. Thank you so much. Okay, so we're beginning to see those of you who are working on outlining a goal or several of the goals that you have agreed to with your advisory group or your board. We're also seeing some of the goals emerge here in the chat box. So a goal around telemedicine, goal around workforce planning. Let's see, these are always so wonderful to see. Best practices for best practices for ACA enrollment, perfect. You can begin to see the variety of both goals and how goals are supported and how they emerge. So a strong infrastructure, doing a needs assessment. Perfect. You can begin to see that as unique as each community is, each network is beginning to reflect that uniqueness and those partners that came together, whether they're competitors who agreed to participate together or whether they have been colleagues for a long time working together. Increasing revenues, perfect. Building capacity around collaboration, excellent. And I would say that you could recognize the level right here in this chat box of innovation and creativity. You're building. Look at the language here in these goals. It's superb. You're building capacity. You're organizing a faith-based wellness initiative. You're increasing CMI revenue. So there's a goal in here, and yet there's some wide open space. And creativity and innovation really demand and thrive best in wide open space. And we'll begin to understand why that is in just a moment. Great. These are excellent. Aren't you just all amazed at the work you're doing? It's incredible. Okay. So back to the slides, and we're looking at this slide about how can we use some technology tools to open up this space to innovation and creativity. And I want to just remind you that this whole area of innovation is a process. It's a process of discovery that requires a very different approach to leadership, and that's why I took you to your goals that you put in the chat box and pointed out some of the language that you're using. Innovation requires the ability to ask open-ended questions. Creativity asks you to really spend the time in these questions without driving to a solution, a goal, or a timeline. So for most of the work that you will do for your HRSA grant, it really is driven by the goals that you have established. And at the same time, the goal of thinking about sustainability demands innovation and creative thinking. So we're going to explore some tools that maybe some of you have already been experimenting with about how do you take a portion of either your face-to-face meetings that you hold with your board members or key stakeholders. How do you take a portion of those face-to-face meetings? How do you take a portion of your regular board or advisory meetings? And how do you create virtual conversations between meetings to allow space for open-ended questions? So why am I so insistent on open-ended questions? So I'm just going to take, Greg, thank you. You must have been reading my mind because Greg has just teed up the question that we're going to use for experimenting with Google Docs or Dropbox or some of the other technology that I'm going to encourage you to think about using to season the conversation at your board meetings. So if Greg's question is, what are possible chronic health care issues that can be addressed through remote delivery of services? What might some of those be? Now, you'll hear that I phrased it a little bit differently than Greg did. And Greg, I hope you'll allow me that kind of reframing just for purposes of identifying this. I like this particular goal that also lends itself so well to innovation and creativity because it's a perfect one to have conversations around. So if Greg was able to tee up a Google Doc and say to his board members, in the next 48 hours, I'm going to circulate to you a question, and you can just write everything down top of mind. Doesn't have to have a promising practice attached to it. Doesn't have to be right or wrong. I just want your best thinking as I pose this question to you. Please consider what the chronic health issues are that could be addressed through remote delivery of services. Just that simple. Greg puts it on a Google Doc. He sends it out. Now, for most of you, if you've played with any of this technology, Google Docs are fun and easy to use. It's a matter of clicking, and so everyone can feel free to play in them, and it doesn't require a lot of time. And what happens is all of your colleagues, everyone in your steering committee or your board is able to begin to participate in this inquiry. You take that information then, so can you imagine just what kind of feedback Greg may get? And again, it's just open-ended. He's not saying that his goals are growing, although in this case it might flavor and inform his goals. He's just opening the door to inquiry. It's a way to get everyone involved because many of your board members have different preferences for how they like to engage. Some of our board members like to talk because in talking they're able to get their ideas out. Other people prefer to think about ideas and concepts over time, so Greg's given them 48 hours on this. Others just really think through their fingers, they're visual learners, and so being able to brainstorm on a Google Doc is perfect for their preferred way of learning and communicating. So in this crazy Google Doc with an open-ended question, Greg has opened up innovation and creativity over 48 hours for some feedback on a question that's been top of mind for him and for probably several of the board members. What happens then at the board meeting, and I'm going to kind of jump ahead, he would be able to bring in the results of this survey for a 10 or 15-minute discussion about what emerged in that conversation. So can you begin to see that you have conversations between meetings using some of these tools that are quick but open up questions? And again, in this whole area of innovation and creativity, you only want to pose questions. You're not seeking answers. You just, for this portion of creativity and innovation, want questions answered. So anybody tried this? I'm just curious. Anyone tried anything like this? Maybe all your board members are great and show up for every meeting. I'm seeing multiple people typing, great, let's see what emerges here. I have not. Great. Did something similar when we had our first meeting. Greg, great. Good. And what often happens in creativity and innovation is that doing it at the first meeting, you want to capture it really quickly and put it as a to-do for meeting 3 or 4, so you keep the spirit of innovation and creativity open. Great, I'm seeing Dropbox. Perfect. That's another great technology tool, easy to use. And it keeps those virtual connections between meetings, because I don't know about you, but some of my key stakeholders get really busy between face-to-face or meetings. And so this is a way to keep folks connected and thinking with you. Great. George, you just now have a tool that you can use to seed some conversation before your meeting. Perfect. Great. So you can begin to see that there's already in this learning community this real spirit of willingness to experiment with different tools. So that's exactly what you want to embed in your thinking around delivering goals and dealing with challenges. So challenges actually takes us to the next section on your assessment. So if you go to your assessment tool, the third section, B, that talks about what are some challenges you encounter. And this question is the perfect question for really, really, I like to say, having a field day with innovation and creativity. Some people look at challenges as opportunities. Other people see challenges as a gift to give to somebody else to noodle on for a while. All those answers are right. But if you would just think about the challenges for starting up your network. Some of you are just having a first meeting. Some of you have had several meetings already, so you're at different places in these unique communities. Just quickly go ahead and write down some of the challenges. And again, if you don't mind, of you who are able to quickly list challenges, if you could list a few challenges in the chat box. And that kind of keeps us tied together in this learning community as we are able to capture the work in your own assessment, but also share some challenges with others. And I don't know about this group, but usually the challenges are the section that get the most responses. I could go on for challenges working in healthcare for probably quite a bit of time. And what really kind of helps us reframe challenges is the whole area of thinking through innovation and creativity. Great. Competitive turf. Perfect. You've just nailed the unique business framework that networks live in. Competitors coming together to collaborate. Isn't that the greatest paradox you've ever heard? Great, David, you're crossing state borders. Perfect. You're mirroring probably what your clients do, what your patients do. Perfect. So a great response to customers, but probably a bit of an Excedrin headache for you, David. Trying to change old patterns of thought. Oh, gosh, isn't that true for us as humans, too? I love that one. Perfect. You can see some wonderful new stakeholders emerging here with Rebecca's schools and community-based entities. Communicating what a network really is. Yeah, and probably, Beth, if I was to add a little bit more languaging to that, communicating not only what a network is, but what your unique network is. Perfect. These are great challenges that networks face. And what creativity and innovation does is allow us during very targeted parts of a board meeting or an advisory group meeting is to begin to tackle some of these things. Breaking down barriers in the community. Yeah, people probably in networks, and again, I was able to work in a network that had been around for some 30 years, but even after all that time, the very thoughts of competitors, hospitals who compete against one another, coming together to collaborate was often really a conundrum for communities to consider. And they just watch. And indeed, what you're doing, again, is a very unique business model. Good. Everyone is absolutely, you have just nailed it, Geraldine. Everyone really is busy. And having the resources, as Greg points out, just to go through a thoughtful planning process to land on goals is really a challenge. Great. So by now, we have moved you swiftly, and you'll want to go back and relook at it again, but we've moved you swiftly through the first several parts of the assessment, and I want to take you back to innovation and creativity itself. So all of the challenges that you identified here, thank you again so much for sharing and for being willing to identify some of the goals you have and some of the challenges. The whole work of innovation in a sharing economy, and again, this work that you're doing, I probably can't say it enough, is very innovative just by the very nature of bringing competitors together to share. You're making changes in something established. You're using imagination. You're bringing your imagination and original ideas to the table, and you're trying to ground them, as Greg says. Samantha noted that you said a mouthful there, Greg, so I would agree with that. But what Greg points out is this tension that you probably feel as a leader between doing the imagination and grounding it in planning. So you're being asked to creatively innovate concepts, practices, technology, and stakeholders. And the good news is that there are networks around who have been very successful at doing this over time and have been willing to kind of put that fin in the air and punch above their weight and dream big. Here's a framework to think about. And by the way, this doesn't take away from the established goals that you put forward that you were moving to accomplish. But here's a framework for this part of innovation and creativity that feeds those goals and allows you to continue the traction of moving to sustainability. it's not necessarily an innovation and creativity, and I want to distinguish that if it's okay with you. And my apologies if this seems like a repeat, but often we feel so driven to have answers and to have measurable goals, and that is true. But just like you're bringing competitors together to collaborate, you as the leader or the person really responsible for influencing this process and leading this process are also doing two acts that seem like they may collide. You're driving and moving and supporting work on goals. And at the same time, you're opening your mind and everyone else's mind and time to a process of engagement that simply asks questions. So you're driving to meet goals and you're opening yourself to innovation and creativity through asking questions and inquiring. So that's a toggle. You are, as Greg said, chasing the dollars that make that all possible. So we've talked a little bit about moving forward on using technology, and sometimes you just have to think of new ways to create possibilities. I want to thank Gretchen up in Prince of Wales and Alaska for this particular slide, and I want to just tell you a really quick story about that particular network. That was a network that had so many goals in front of it. And had 5 very, very different partners that emerged from the actual hospital, not on the island, but off the island, which creates its own wonderful challenge for those of us who are island livers. Health departments, the native leaders of the specific 5 native tribes in Prince of Wales, and they decided that a goal was to improve healthcare on the island. You can imagine at that process, for those of you who've been in healthcare for a while, like most of us have, the systems that you run into. 5 different healthcare systems, 5 different ways of collecting information, 5 different ways of charging for healthcare. And so they began to narrow that down, and they began to work with a small group of providers who were willing to get in there, roll up their sleeves, and say, here's what we're going to do. We're just going to target children. And then they began to narrow again. So you can see where imagination and creativity begins to play. We're not only going to deal with children, we're going to limit children immunizations to the question of who should be immunized, or what immunizations are necessary from age 0 to 1.5. Now the 0 seems a little strange, but you get my point. Up to year 1.5. So you can begin to see that as creativity and innovation played in this, the Prince of Wales Island went from a question of how do we build health care on this island of really rough terrain, very, very rural area. How do we build this solution of health care? And they began to put their heads together, narrow the question, and so it became health care for children under 1.5. Well, this particular child is a little over 1.5, and I've met this individual. So the outcome was great minds coming together in open-ended questions to say what is possible to meet a healthcare question and landed on an answer. So you can see that, I don't know if this example helps you, but it's opening up to create possibilities that aren't bound at first. So you let creativity and innovation just go crazy for a while. And then you're able to land in a solution. So let me just pause there and say that often network leaders hold themselves responsible for this sitcom, and I just want you to allow your imaginations to go free. Maybe this isn't any of you, but my favorite network characteristic when you feel the responsibility of meeting goals and being innovative and creative about what else is possible with these competitors who you want to collaborate with, sometimes doesn't it feel like you're leaping tall buildings just in a single bound or leaping from one fishbowl into another? I don't know if anyone feels like that, but sometimes when we're dealing with innovation and creativity, it can feel like that. I just realized we have a lot of fish stories in here, so I must be deeply somehow attached to water lately. Let me just talk about how you can both be supported by creativity and innovation, and how innovation and creativity can support you. Deborah, thank you. I just want to do a pause here, and please, as Deborah's just kind of asked for a brief pause here, let's go back here again and take a look. The validation of being and the experience of being and doing for all people. I think that that's an important part of creativity and innovation. The great news is that because you're dealing with such a diverse group of people, let's back here somewhere. Because you're dealing with a whole group of people that are very unique, often you feel that you're responsible for resolving each one of those issues or responding to each question, and on some level you are. But on another level, it's the whole group that's coming together and looking for ways to share or ways to collaborate. Maybe not 100%, but maybe 80%. Or maybe your agreement is that only 60% have to agree on some sort of business or collaboration. But what happens when you have such a diverse population is that you can also know that you're getting very diverse perspectives, which really are a key feature in this innovation and creativity. So thank you, Deborah, for taking us to that point. Again, the frame for just innovation and creativity, it's how we leverage the tools. So let's move forward just a little bit on this. We've talked about this kind of what's expected of a leader. Here's some ways to engage your board, your advisory group, and some of the key stakeholders that may not officially be on your board or your advisory group, but you really go to them for wisdom, for perspective, for balance, that they can, your audience, your key stakeholders can be used to provide you benchmarks. I'm on the second bullet here. They can give you metrics. As you become colleagues in this group, in this learning community, part of what you can ask for and expect are some promising practices. You can encourage your board members to send not only you, but to send the entire body. Whenever you can, encourage your network or your advisory group to share best practices across the whole group. There's something very different about an article coming to you versus an article or a best practice or a benchmark going out to the whole body. So just really put that's one of the features of innovation and creativity, that everyone gets kind of very diverse articles, research, blogs, YouTubes. There's any number of ways that we get information that allow us to be thoughtful in how we respond to unique community events. I'm just going to go through as we reach the end of our time together, and I want to give us a chance to spend some time setting some goals, some thoughts about what you can do in this area of innovation and creativity. And again, I want to put a frame around innovation and creativity. You really do, again, have some goals that are in section B2 for your network. Those will probably take different shapes as time moves on, as you get more and more refined in what's possible and plausible, both through time and money and stakeholders. But the second business that you're engaged in that will inform your goals and give you some new thinking around sustainability is this area of innovation and creativity, which allows you to experiment in business. It allows you to take new concepts and allows you to experiment with new approaches. and to kind of keep that innovation and creativity on every board docket, even if it's only 10 minutes at the end of the meeting, that you pose an open-ended question. And you say, if we had all the time in the world, what new business venture might we create that serves the greatest number of individuals in this particular county and or area of the state or across states? An open-ended question that allows folks to leave having really dealt with what's possible. And again, the last 10 minutes of a board meeting is not the silver bullet, but it's often the time where people have really connected with each other, understand the unique perspectives in the room, and so it's a great time for innovation and creativity. Yes, exactly. George, that's a great question. What can faith do? That's a beautiful open-ended question that goes to your unique network or emerging network. That's perfect. And so if that becomes a key question, ask at the end of quarterly board meetings, for example, can you imagine the innovation and creativity that flow there? Here's what network leaders may do. In innovation and creativity, it's a healthy way of kind of standing and stretching as you did in the beginning. It allows you to know that this is a process. It's an inquiry. That not taking it too personally and not taking it too seriously, because I haven't met a network leader yet that isn't so totally committed to this innovative approach of pulling together this very unique combination of competitors that collaborate. And do laugh often. And my hunch is if we kind of went around this group and said, which of these tools work best for you as you work with your emerging networks or your seasoned networks and you're putting a new business line in place, probably one of these tools may be healthy or helpful for you. Before we go on, or before we end and turn it over to Leslie, I just want to give you a bit of time. We've moved very swiftly through this concept of creativity and innovation, the ability to, or the process of discovering different approaches through open-ended questions, through pulling in very diverse perspectives, to being willing, and we haven't had a chance to talk about this a great deal, but a willingness to do small experiments that may or may not succeed. Sometimes I want to, in meetings, instead of talking about promising practices, I really want to talk about pilots that really failed. I want to know why. I want to celebrate someone who is courageous enough with their network to do an experiment that didn't work, because it's when we experiment in this area of creativity and innovation, it's when we experiment and we're willing to try a small pilot and it goes wrong, we're able to learn much more quickly and we're able to adapt much more quickly. And of course you have to use good judgment in this, but pilots are just excellent tools to use in addition to brainstorming and getting everyone engaged in brainstorming in this process. So this last slide, slide 21, if you'll pull that forward either on the slides or in however you keep your to-do list, we're going to ask you to put in an area, at least one, and you, for those of you who would just have fun with this, you can put as many areas as you'd like, an area for innovation and creativity that you're willing to experiment with between now and February 15th. So you'll put an area that you're going to experiment with, and then you're going to put a date on your iPhone, on your calendar, however you track time, that says at 10 o'clock on the 14th of February, I'm going to check in and see how I've done with this experiment. So we're going to set you up for piloting. So go ahead, capture an area. And this is the last time, I promise, unless you take an initiative on your own. If some of you are willing to put in the area that you're going to just experiment in innovation and creativity. You're going to ask wide open questions. You're not going to give yourself another task for your to-do list. This is just experimenting in innovation and creativity. If you're willing to kind of put that in there, that would be great. Let's just kind of see what people are willing to experiment with. I see typing going on. Great. Okay. How does it feel to do something that doesn't have an outcome attached to it, just to engage in innovation and creativity? Great. So here it comes. Piloting our experimental resource Google Map with clients and providers to see if it is really more useful. Perfect. So can you see Deborah's willing to go out there and just going to pilot? It's probably not going to be the whole map. I could be wrong, Deborah, but your language is just perfect for innovation and creativity. Piloting, experimental. Great. That's perfect. Anyone else with a goal that they're willing to share with us around innovation and creativity? Develop. Mark, if you would allow me, I just want to do a bit of reframing. Instead of developing strong outreach, what if you considered experimenting in one area of our, I'm going to just say county, around what outreach would look like? So experiment. Develop is also a good word, but it's more, gosh, I've got to land on it. So just experiment with. It allows you to have a little more play there and involve your members in saying what worked or didn't work. Perfect. You all have nailed it. You should have now at least one innovation and creativity area you're going to play with. Perfect, Mark. That's great. That's cool. Your date that you're going to check on, and we'll check back the next time, again, as you feel comfortable. Leslie, I'm going to turn this back over to you for some reminders and for the evaluation, and my thanks to each of you for being with us and for participating so fully.
Yes, thank you. I just put a few poll questions on the screen. If you could just take a couple of minutes to answer those 4 questions about today's webinar, we would greatly appreciate that. And if you have any other comments, feel free to put them in the chat box, or you can email any suggestions to us at networkta@ruralcenter.org. And I want to thank everybody for participating today, and thank Mary Kay for the great presentation. And the next webinar in the Leadership Learning Community Series is going to be on Thursday, February 26th at the same time, and the topic will be Change Leadership. So we hope to see you all back here again next month. And again, thank you all for participating today. Everybody was very engaged in the chat box, and that's great to see. Have a great day.